Welcome back. So, occasionally on this channel, I'll do a video talking about officiating, and I feel like today's a good day to do that. We're getting into the playoffs, and a lot of comments about officiating, and this controversial non-call, this controversial call, then this controversial icing, and it goes and goes and goes. This is not unique to hockey. This is not unique to North America. This is something that happens with sports all around the world. If it's a team sport, there is somebody somewhere complaining about the officiating. And it's not even just at the pro level. Like, it's not even just like the NHL. I've been to AHL games here in Abbotsford. Fans get angry at the refs at the AHL level. They get mad at them at the ECHL level. They get mad at them all the way down. In putting this board together, I even read an article from a columnist who talked about his experience as a basketball coach once for a grade 5 game, and how he was verbally abused throughout that game by players, coaches, and fans. And he was really surprised just at how quickly they would all argue. And he said they can barely dribble, but they know their team's getting screwed over, and there was nothing that he could do to change their mind on that. And certainly it's something I've discussed with the NBA. It's one league that I did follow. The Vancouver Grizzlies were, a local team, and I didn't like the officiating in certain games. I felt like some games were called differently than others. I felt like some teams were kind of favored over others. The NFL. I have had that view as well with the NFL. It's part of the reason I don't follow the NFL as much as I used to, is because I don't know, there were times where I was like, that call. So I wanted to go through some recent incidents in other sports, because we do talk a lot about the NHL. I want to talk about other sports just to kind of, look at the big picture with this. I've discussed calls. I've discussed what does or doesn't get called with the National Hockey League. I have been on the record for a long time saying, just call the rule book. I don't care what time of the game it is. I don't care if the game is in October or June. Call the rule book. And if players know what the calls are going to be, they will adjust their game accordingly. And in the playoffs, players know that some of the things that were called penalties back in October are not going to be called penalties anymore. In fact, one thing that was notable down the stretch was that power plays seemed to be getting fewer and fewer as the year went along. And I don't know if the game was necessarily getting cleaner, just penalties were not being called. But this is something that is, once again, not unique to the National Hockey League. The more important the game, the more amplified a call or a non-call becomes. Now, in NFL news, the Chiefs and the NFL officials have blasted referee conspiracy theories that the Chiefs get favored. And I did see an article saying, I think dating like 3 years back, the Chiefs have had 120 more yards of penalties called against them than they have in their favor. The answer to that from NFL fans would be, yeah, but when? In what situations are these guys being penalized as opposed to the other team being penalized? And in a key moment of the game against my team, and this is what fans' responses would be to that information, right? Because you'll remember, well, there was a pass interference call here on my team, and then the Chiefs did this. It was the same thing, and it wasn't called. And there you go, and that's where all of that starts. NBA fans reportedly have mixed feelings about how playoff games are being called right now. This was an article from today that I found. So the NBA, and I did, for the full sake of transparency, say, yeah, the NBA, I did have problems with the way certain games were called. And it definitely dropped down my interest in the NBA. It absolutely did. An LAFC coach going to Major League Soccer news, he got a red card in a game, very recent game, and the coach of Portland apparently had some words about the officiating in that game as well. Major League Soccer has absolutely had calls on their officiating and various other, but hey, if you want to get into soccer officiating, just look at the World Cup, and you're going to find a lot of times that red cards might be called, might not be called, yellow cards might or might not be. And there's definitely arguments for the refs threw the game, the refs screwed us over, so-and-so paid off the refs. And this is not unique to hockey. This is in all team sports. One of the reasons I don't harp on, like last night, there was a controversial icing call for Montreal. And the idea was that shouldn't have been icing because And sometimes officials fix those calls. Sometimes they don't. There was an icing call, I want to say late in the regular season, where I said out loud, "Are you kidding?" And they kept it. But it wasn't a playoff game. There wasn't a goal that resulted from that. So it kind of gets glossed over. When a goal happens soon after a play like that, fans will focus on it and say, "We lost the game because." There's definitely the negativity bias is there. Before the games even started, there was a game I went to in Abbotsford, and they were booing the referees before the game even got started. And I thought, it seems a little early to be booing the refs, but okay. But I've seen it in NHL games too. Refs come out on the ice, start warming up, skating around, and boo. The game hasn't started. You're booing these guys because they're referees and linesmen, and then it's, well, why didn't they give me any calls? I don't know. If I show up somewhere and a guy goes, "Hey, how you doing?" Screw you. I might be like, I'll remember that later. I know referees don't, but it just seems like an odd way to approach them. Like, these guys who could decide the fate of my team later in the game, I should boo them viciously. And then when they don't favor my team, be really angry with them for it. It's an odd strategy. Now, the negativity bias is there, and the officials are human. Yes, officials make mistakes. And for people who say, well, if they just use replay to get the calls right, no, because they use replay, they make that call, and fans will still complain. One thing that has happened over the last 5-6 years, since the infamous or famous Joe Pavelski injury and Vegas having a 5-minute penalty, the NHL's made it so you can review 5-minute penalties. That's where that comes from. And you would think that having the ability to review a 5-minute call to make sure you got it right would lead to fewer complaints. It has not. It absolutely has not. Because if you keep it a 5, the argument from the fans of the team that got the 5-minute penalty will be, but hey, remember this call earlier in the game? Why wasn't that 5? Or for when it gets dropped to 2 minutes, the fans of the team that would have had a 5-minute penalty, 5-minute power play go, "That's wrong. That was the wrong call. That should have been 5. That's 5 all day. Why not?" But there are also some fans who will view a missed penalty and say, "I hope Department of Player Safety weighs in on this," when it was a missed call. It's a 2-minute penalty. And the NHL has somebody watching all these games, and they do grade the officials as the playoffs roll around, come along. I'm mixing my metaphors, but as the NHL season rolls along, that's a better way of putting it, and we get further into the playoffs, the better graded officials are the ones that are still standing. So when we get to the final, that essentially should be the referees that got the best grade from the officiating supervisors that are watching the games and grading out the officials. Now, looking at the comment section, and I thought, it would be kind of fun to pull some comments and write them up on the board. And then I realized just how daunting that could be. Because the channel being around as long as it's been, going back as far as I wanted to, I probably don't want to do that. But going back to, and this is just in the time this channel was around, you have the Penguins win in 2016 and 2017. I don't remember a lot of criticism in 2016, but I do in 2017 about the Penguins getting the win. I will say this, 2016 run, the channel was below 1,000 subscribers, so I may just not have seen it. I may very well not have seen it. 2017, I definitely saw it. That final against Nashville especially, there were calls and non-calls that got talked about a lot. And there was a perception that, okay, the Penguins are being favored right now by officials. 2018, I definitely saw it with Washington. And I think the part that I've always found entertaining is, I remember in the conference final with the Capitals, every time they won, there were people saying, okay, the officiating is favoring the Capitals, but every time they lost, Caps fans would jump in and go, nope, the referees hate us, and we're going to lose because, the officiating, and then they won. 2019, St. Louis Blues won the Stanley Cup. There were some controversial calls and non-calls, especially in that final, and but to me, in the end, the right team won. And I think that's part of it, too, is that for all of the smoke and mirrors and for all the discussion from fans, I will look at the Stanley Cup champion, and 9 times out of 10, I'm like, yeah, the right team won. And the 10th time, I might just be ticked off. So, maybe I change the channel and go do something else. 2020 and 2021, Tampa Bay wins. And there's the alternatives with this. So, in 2020 and 2021, they won. During the runs to the final and the wins, there were definitely accusations of the NHL's making this happen. They're the favored team. They're way over the cap, yada, yada, yada. But now people reduce it after to saying, well, those were flukes. Those aren't real. They don't count. So the officials were blamed at the time, and now people just want to discredit back-to-back Stanley Cup champions. I won't and I can't, because I watched those playoffs, and those bubble playoffs in 2020, those are difficult conditions to play in. So, I have to give them credit for that. 2022 in the Avs one, there was definitely some criticism of officials and calls that were or were not made along the way there. 2020, the Vegas Golden Knights. I can stop right there. I don't even have to say, controversy. I just have to say Vegas Golden Knights, and immediately fans are just jumping on that. And then last year, there were definitely some complaints about Florida and their run to the final and what calls they did or didn't get. And the Sam Bennett Phantom Punch is one that gets mentioned a lot. But one thing that doesn't get taken into consideration, I feel, is there are things that referees just flat out miss. And the game is very fast. Like some of these sports, even soccer. Soccer is a huge, huge surface that you're looking at. And I would think it might be very difficult to track and getting all these calls right. Because you're in the moment. You're in the moment. You have to make that call. And it is not that easy. Like your mind registers what you just saw, and you have to decide, is that or isn't that a penalty immediately. And there's no leeway. You can't put your arm up 10 seconds later and go, actually, I think. Now, there are times that a referee will delay putting their arm up by 3 or 4 seconds, not by 10. I don't recall ever seeing 10. Crowd reaction, I do think, has an influence on that. So there's two theories I have on that. Either the crowd reaction gets the referee to start paying attention to some part of the ice that maybe he wasn't before, or similarly, so the fans react to something that's happened, the referee might move his focus and go, there it is, and then put his arm up. So a fan reaction, which you're not going to get when your team commits the foul, you're just going to be like, oh man, lucky you didn't get caught. Did you see that? That was a total slash on the hands. Well, we're not going to say anything there. But the ref is the one that takes the blame. I've always felt that it is easiest to blame officials when a team falls short. I've never done that at the end of a series. I've never said, my team, the team I'm rooting for, lost. And it wasn't because they weren't good enough. It was because the officiating had it in for them. And it is sort of a coping mechanism there, right? With the team lost, but it's not their fault. It really is not their fault that they lost. And it is, in fact, the fault of the guys who wear the black and white striped shirts out there with the nice little orange armbands. They're the problem. They're the ones that have made this situation where my team has now been eliminated from the playoffs. I know that it is always a conversation. So when I do the reviews during the playoffs, I will mention calls. There are obviously the moments where I'll say fans call when the referee does not discuss whether or not it's a legitimate gripe on the part of the fans. The ref you suck chants, I don't say whether or not they're warranted. But I do understand that the officials have a very difficult job. It is, when you're dealing with sports fans, you are dealing with people who are very emotional in the moment. And I'm generally not. I sometimes feel like I don't necessarily fit into the space with other people who talk about sports. In that I don't get that emotional. There are times, and there are videos on this channel where I've got emotional. Back in 2021, when the Leafs blew that 3-1 series lead against Montreal, I was ticked off at the Leafs. Even though I didn't have an emotional stake for either team, I felt like that was the series where Toronto was finally going to be able to move on and maybe, go on a bit of a run, and they blew it. And it was one of those few times. But it does not happen that often. And I do my best not to fall into that my team would have won, but the officials made sure they didn't, because I generally do not find that. I think one thing that's always interesting is that fans will always say the officials don't like my team. I can't recall anybody ever saying, it is great that the officials favor my team. I really think that because fans don't see that. Fans generally don't see that. They will just see the negative. They will just see what's happened to their team, the call that went against them, and that's where we're at. So there are 4 more games tonight in the National Hockey League as the playoffs roll along. I do expect a lot of the referee sucks, the officials, screwed us over, yada, yada, yada. But it is just part and parcel of team sports, and it is not isolated to the National Hockey League. And all these calls for, we need better officiating. Every sport, every team sport, that is said, and it is pretty much global. When I was putting this board together, 2013, the referees cost us the game. That's an article. It's a Detroit Red Wings article. NFL from 2015, leave the refs alone. It's not their fault your team lost. It's the headline right there. And it gets into a lot of the same things that we discuss now a decade later. And it's the same thing. There is no big difference other than the sport that's being played. The accusations are all the same. And that was something I was going to put on the board. For instance, the refs threw the game and blank paid off the refs. That was from an article on soccer. So, yeah, it is something that's everywhere. It is absolutely everywhere. It's just a part of, I guess, being a sports fan. And for me, it goes back to, I want to say the 80s. I want to say that I remember my grandfather complaining at times about the state of officiating back in the 80s. To me, and I know he complained a lot about the state of the National Hockey League and how it was all falling apart. I know the original 6 era was the truly good era of hockey, and what we were watching then was basically drivel. It wasn't any good. So, yeah, some of these arguments, some of these statements, some of these things we hear around the sporting world, not new. Not new. And they will continue and echo on from one generation into the next. So, yeah, there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And I'm not saying that officials are perfect. That's not a thing. But I'm also saying I generally look at plays that happen and say, all right, so, how the team reacted to a bad call is something I'm far more likely to pay attention to than the bad call itself. Because good teams will overcome bad calls. Winning teams and any of these Stanley Cup champions, at some point in any of their Stanley Cup runs, there were calls against them that maybe shouldn't have been made, and there were calls that weren't made against them that probably should have been made, and in the end they emerged as the champs. So there you go. Thank you guys so much for all your support as always. If you haven't already hit like and subscribe, please do. I will talk to you again soon enough.